I am using the Stillman Burn Zeta Series sketchbook in the 9 by 12 size for this study of Edward Potthast. I have primed the right page with Zinsser by Bullseye primer and some blue acrylic paint. Pretty dark. I don't usually tone this dark, but it looks like he used a dark tone. And I'm going to do a quick rough draft on this left side. So I'm going to be using just some thin vine charcoal, and I have a wooden skewer, bamboo skewer, that I pop the tip off just so I don't stab myself. And I've got a little tri-tip eraser, which is a good workhorse. I usually use this with pastel and things that I'm trying to get really clean on, trying to totally get erased. I have my image from Edward Potthast, and I have pulled it up in Preview, which is my photo viewer on a Mac, and there is an editing option. If you just click on this little marker and then go over to the little mountain looking thing here that gives you your color adjustments. And I like to totally remove all the color while I'm drawing, just to get that out of the way. And I can turn that editing part off. That really just helps me look at the simple shapes and the values. And I like to do a rough draft just to get myself familiar with the values for this painting. There really are hardly any darks. The darkest darks are the top of her head and this front plane of her face, and right here by her bow. And there's the next hierarchy of darks is down here by her feet, and a couple of little spots, but they're really mid-tones. Her dress is the lightest plane and bow. Next would be the skin tone on the side of her face and her arm. The background has middle tone dark, could be just my screenshot. I'll have to look at that a little further. Middle tone dark, middle tone light, middle tone light, and it goes down and is a little bit darker down here at the bottom. So now I kind of have an idea of my values. Let's look at the shape and make a couple of observations real quick. I'm going to use her head as a standard. So she's bent over, so she's not standing up straight. But I'm going to see how many heads tall she is. 1, 2, 3 to her hand or knuckles. 4 just below her knee. And about a little less than 5 heads tall. So I can come over here, and then also let's check. So a little less than 5 heads, and let's see how wide she is at her widest point. So from the back of her dress to her wrist is a head, and from her wrist is just a little less than 2 heads wide to her widest part of her dress. And that's typical. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to place a mark where I think the head goes, where I want to place it, and then her feet down here at the bottom. And the feet are almost in the middle of the canvas. Her head over to one side, and I'll be checking that with plumb lines. But just for a rough draft now, I want to go ahead and figure out how big her head should be for my rough draft. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's too small. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh no, that's about right. 5. A little less than 5 with her feet. So I eyeballed it right just the first time. And you can usually do that. I like to check it before I get started. It saves me a lot of time. Her head is very much almost a square box. I'm going to put it in as a circle to start with. And then this upper part of her body, and I might find her halfway mark as well. So I'm going to guess her halfway mark is the bend of her elbow. And that's almost right. So let's go down a little further, just below the bend of her elbow. Nope, a little further. All right, so this area of her dress is the halfway mark. So I can come over here and check and just try to guess what the halfway mark is. A little bit lower. I want to go all the way down to here. So about right here is the halfway mark. All right, so my rough draft, and I know that just below her, just right here at her shirt is the halfway mark. So I'll keep that in mind as I draw this triangular shape. And again, there are no details here. I really just want to see the simplest version of this painting. And her head comes out just a bit further than her skirt. The back of her head comes right along the front of her arm. Back of her head. So that's about right. This angle of her hair overall is a bit downward, and look, I already have it going upward. So for the most part, it's this way. Again, hair, check your plumb lines. Hair comes out just a bit further than her dress. So I've overshot that a bit. There we go. Just a bit further than her dress. Still not coming out far enough. Let me check the height to width on her head. And almost to the back of her bow is about halfway through her bow is the width of it. All right, so her bow is there. Jawline, face. And make sure you get that tilt right on that face. Pretty far tilted. And remember that this angle goes this way. You can also use negative space right here, but again, no details. We just want to mass in what we see. You can think about negative space here, a little bit of dark here. This is the halfway mark. Her arm is a bit more forward, so I have the elbow way back here. So I can check the plumb line, and her elbow is even with the back of her bow. So I can move that arm a bit forward. It goes down and then over. And then there's not that much space right here. There's a bit of a mid-tone here. A little bit of her arm. And the more you draw, the more the puzzle pieces fit together. So this whole section here is I'm going to just ignore that light spot in the middle of her front section and just interpret this right now as a mid-tone right there. There's a mid-tone here. And I want to make sure I don't get that too wide. And when I draw it, I can adjust it. But right now I just am looking at simple shapes and values. The front of her leg or her knee lines up with her chin, so that's about right. And then there's some simple shapes on her legs. So get yourself used to looking for simple shapes and values to start with. And then I will go ahead and indicate this dark on the front of her face. And this dark on the front of her bow. Okay, that's really all. Going back again, this is the mid-tone. I'm going to go ahead and just record that as one solid mid-tone. I'm not worried about the little pieces of light that might be in there, or reflected light. And this is my block in. So that's all you're concerned about right now, and this will help you get more familiar with the painting when you get ready to draw it. Oh, let's see, let me go ahead and do a little bit of this bow. Simple shapes. This looks like a wadded up napkin. Okay, let me review for you since I didn't have the lower part on the camera. The complete figure is 5 heads tall. So you can go back and check yourself. 1, 2, the lower elbow, 3 to her wrist, 4 to almost the bottom of her dress, and 5 to her feet. You can check your plumb lines. The top of her head comes out just a bit further than her skirt, so I do need to adjust that. The front of her dress, next to her elbow, intersects the middle of her face. And the back of her legs, where her knee is, comes up plumb with the back of her neck. Right here where her dress stops is the halfway mark. So that'll keep you from getting her torso too long or short, and the lower part of her body too long or short. That's going to be your checkpoint right there. This will help you in a lot of ways. It'll get you familiar with the figure. It'll break down these simple shapes into lights, mediums, and darks. Helps you find the halfway mark, how many heads tall, how many heads wide. And when you get ready to draw it for the painting, you'll be much better informed. So she's a little less than 2 heads wide. Her head is the shape of almost like a box with rounded corners. So when you're doing a figure, it's a good idea, or a portrait, it's a good idea to decide on head shape to start with, or face shape. Is it heart shape? Is it box shaped? Is it oval? Is it round? Because that'll help you get a likeness before you even get any details on. Yep. So that's your quick lay-in, is to put a line at the top of the head and at the bottom of the feet. Figure out how many heads tall she is, how many heads wide, and then begin to slowly lay in the simple shapes. And look for areas of medium and dark. There are not many dark areas on her. So that is simply all we're doing on this exercise, is looking for simple shapes, values, and a quick rough draft to familiarize yourself with the painting. Really, there's only the white of the paper and the middle tone shadow on the front of her dress, underneath her arm there, in front of her knees, down at her ankles. Making sure that you stay within the height and width of your proportions. Her head is predominantly a square with rounded edges. Check your plumb lines. She is from her neck, plumb all the way down, the front of her feet, the front of her neck, and just through the top of her wrist are all plumb. Front of her neck, top of her wrist, and front of her feet is all plumb. So those are things you can do to check before you begin your actual drawing. There is no record of Potthast's palette. The Impressionist probably did not use earth colors, so other than to tone his canvas, he had a raw sienna type color most of the time, it looks like, to tone his canvases with. I have toned mine with a blue because I see so much blue showing through on this particular painting. I am going to stick with the primaries, Cad Yellow, Cad Red Medium, and Ultramarine Blue. I cleaned up my palette, so this is a mixture of my reds, and I'm really just looking for a red, a primary blue, and a primary yellow. So whatever you have, this one is a little bit dirty and leaning towards, well, it's a mid-tone yellow. It's got some greenish cast to it, probably because of the, because I've dirtied it up a little bit. The main color that I see in working on this is the blue water for the background, and the sky it's not really sky, it looks like sand. So it's a sand color, which is a raw sienna color. And raw sienna is a mixture of yellow and purple, but the purple will lean toward the violet or red side. So you don't want too much blue in your purple. It's just easier for me, and I think it's clear. It makes it more clear to go ahead and mix up a purple so that you can see you're mixing the complements to get this raw sienna color. So there's a violet. It's hard to tell when you first mix a purple, so sometimes if you mix a little tiny bit of white with it, you can tell the hue a little bit better. There, so you can see that's definitely a reddish purple. And just some of your Cad Yellow mixed in, or some of your purple mixed in with your Cad Yellow. And that just makes kind of a mustard muddy color. If I hold that up, I can tell right off the bat that it needs more red in it. When you mix yellow and purple, a lot of times if there's a lot of green in it, a lot of blue in it, it will go green. So to make a truer raw sienna color, you just need to add more red. So that's about what I see at the top. I hold my palette knife up and look, and then it gets lighter as it moves down. Instead of mixing white with it from the beginning, I'm going to mix yellow to get a more pure color. And then as it goes lighter and lighter, and I'm going to mix a pretty good pile of this because we're only working on this 2 sessions, and I don't want to remix paint. I'd like to have enough from the get-go here. If you're using a Cad Yellow medium, you already have a lot of red in it. So you see how it's getting brighter and brighter the more of this Cad color I put in, or yellow color I put in. So let me go ahead and mix a little bit more. All right, so I've mixed up basically 5 values of this yellow, this raw sienna yellow. And I see some lavender in that sand color. So I've taken the rest of my purple up here and mix some white in with that because that's a medium to light tone lavender. When I paint, I like to have at least 2 or 3 values of each color that I'm working with. That keeps it more interesting, more dimensional, so that you're not tempted to just paint everything one color. And then we have, and I see that lavender in the water as well, so it probably wouldn't hurt to have a little bit more of that mixed up. The last color is the watercolor, and I'm just going to start with ultramarine blue and white. A lot of times when you just mix a pure color up, you have a real Easter egg color, and you see how quickly I do have that. Potthast probably used a lot of vibrant colors like maybe Viridian and Emerald Green and Cobalt Violet. I think you're going to learn more if you stick with the primaries and you just mix from there. There's certain colors that are very difficult, like I can't mix Viridian, so I have to have phthalo. Those are mineral type colors and they're just more challenging. I don't know how you mix them. So you do have to have certain tubes of paint to get certain colors. I see this around her dress. It's really, really bright. When you have blue like that and it's really too bright, I put a little bit of orange in with it just to dull it. That's the complement. Had a little bit of red on my brush. I mean on my palette knife there anyway, so that kind of dulls it a little bit. And then one more value of this blue. Just mix some white with it. Pull it down this way. And that's mostly what we see in the water with these tones of lavender mixed in. So there you have it, sand color. This is a little bit too bright, but I might put a few pops of that in there. Mostly going to be in this area with the sand and a little bit of this in the very top and around her feet. So that's the palette. And I am going to, notice my tone is really, really dark. So I'm not accustomed to painting on this dark of a tone. With this little sketchbook, it helps if I put a little clip on it to keep my pages from popping out. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the rough draft. I'm going to make a place first by putting the top and the bottom and then the halfway mark. And double checking that to make sure my eye is right. Yep. And remembering that she's 5 heads tall. She's pretty close to the side, although this is a more narrow painting. It is not the same dimension as my sketchbook is. So I'm going to guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe could bump it up just a tad. Why is this important? Because, and I critiqued somebody this week that the head was really small and the body was the right size. So if you can decide how many heads tall and how many heads wide, I mean, it just saves you so much later on. So I'm going to say the back of her skirt is about there, and she's a little less than 2 heads wide at her widest point, which is down below the halfway mark right here. This is her widest point from here to here. A little less than 2 heads. So that'll kind of keep me in check. I also know that, and I could go ahead and put a plumb line on this, her dress comes in just a bit from her head. So her head is going to be out here, which helps me a lot. Now, deciding that, checking the width of the head and the width of the length of the figure shows me that I've got it a little too far forward. Now his is that way. His is more forward and there's more room behind the figure. So you have to decide that. It almost feels like she's walking off the canvas. Do I want to leave it that way? Do I want to push it back a little bit? And at this point, I haven't drawn anything, so I could push it back just a bit. And I think I will. I don't like it so close to the edge. Let me double check it again. 1 and a little less than 2. So it'll come over this way a bit. This is my halfway mark. Top of the head, bottom of the feet, halfway mark. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 heads tall, 1 little less than 2 heads wide. So that gives me a cocoon. And again, I don't frustrate myself and have so many corrections to make. The shape of her head, and again, her head comes out just a bit farther. So that helps me know how far to go with this head. And it's more like a box. And remember when I checked height to width, it's about the same as halfway into her bow. So her bow's going to be about right there. So again, just learning to do this, and I know it's monotonous and it drives you crazy, but it really makes a huge difference. And you can get a drawing on here a lot faster, and you can learn to do these measurements really fast. We know her head is not a box, so I'll quickly, just to soothe myself, Check your angles, pretend like, remember the hands of a clock, and try to gauge your marks as if they were going to a certain time, 4 o'clock, 3:30 maybe on the top of that head. And there's an angle here, there's an angle here, goes in just a bit, her chin goes up this way, her neck maybe there. I can come back in and check that. The top of her shirt comes right up through the middle from her chin. So we know her shirt doesn't need to come out any further than that. And it stops about right there. Not quite to the halfway mark. So see how much that already helps. It gives me a good idea of where I'm going. We're not doing a real detailed drawing here. Also, you can see that the waistline is at a strong slant. So it goes up to about 9:30. This flattens out. This is the widest place here, which is down below the halfway mark, down here, widest place. Her arm comes just up here. Okay, I don't always do this, but it seems like a good idea with this figure. I put a line, a halfway line. I marked half from head to feet. The halfway mark is right about here, and the halfway mark width-wise is right here. This was, remember, this is a little less than two heads wide and 5 heads tall. So I've pretty much put a cross down through there so that we could measure and check ourselves with this figure. So how does that translate over here? Using the T-square, I can draw a line smack down through the middle. I've already checked to find the middle between my less than 2 heads wide, and then here is the halfway mark here. And that's a really good checkpoint for me as I'm working on this figure. I want it to be accurate. And the way the pose is, you can get her hunchbacked, or you can get her head too far forward, her feet too far one way or the other. So this will be a good checkpoint for me. You don't have to do this. It is a little bit like gridding, and I don't like to grid, but it is supporting the plumb line method of checking your drawing. So it's easy to see this negative space here. It's easy to see how much space is right here in front. It's easy to see, you know, the back of her knee is close to this halfway line when you get down to this point, which will be down here. I think it'll just go easier that way. So I'm going to go ahead and draw it now with all these things in place. You can use 1 or 2 or none of these things to draw. However you choose to get it on is your choice. But this works for me, and I'm always developing it and looking for different ways to check myself. See the negative space right here? There's a little diamond shape. Makes it easier to use negative space here. Again, the vine charcoal is such a nice way to draw. And you don't have, it's not so hard to erase as if you were using graphite or even paint. Paint helps you transition to blocking a lot more readily. But see, again, I wouldn't know where to place that. I believe I have this a little high. There we go. If this trips you up, don't worry about it. Again, just draw it. Don't worry about all this. But it's one way to do it. And I'm just showing you new things. Hopefully, if this is something you're not used to doing, this will be helpful to you. You can see how close that is, her. And I'm pretty sure that this was the final, yep, that was the final head down here. So that's about right for where her dress should go. And it's wonderful when the puzzle pieces come together here. And you're still drawing, you're still using rhythm and your own perception of what you see. It's not like you're tracing something and getting very mechanical with it. You're still using these short broken strokes. There's a shadow under here. Her hand is just a pad, which is one reason this is such a great study. It really helps you not over define what's in front of you, but block it in, keeping it very simple. Okay, now there's a bit, I can see how the water is swirling around her feet. And I can also see another good thing that dividing the figure in half did was it showed me exactly where the shoreline is on this side and on this side. There's a bit of a wave or something here. And there's some purple here. Don't think I have this drawn accurately. Her neck is too long. So you can come back in here when I start defining her face. And I will go ahead and define a bit of her face so that I can be sure that I don't have her head too big for her body. Her features, you could go ahead and check that before you start trying to lay her eyes in. Typically on an adult, the eyes are halfway down. So on a child, they're usually further down on the head. The features are usually down in almost the lower third. So that'll be important if you get the eyes too high up on her head. From the highest place on her head, the halfway mark is right where her eyebrows would go. So if you want to find the halfway mark here on your head, double check that. Let's see if there's a bit of a height here. So we're going to say here to here, here to here. So her brow line would be here, which means her eyes would come down further. A bit further. And that will immediately make her look younger. So I'm going to just caution you not to get, not to put those eyes too high up on the head. Key, very key for children. Her bow, I've got too much space here between her bow. So if I check her bow, it's actually even with her eye, so it comes down a bit farther than I have it. There we go. And her shoulder is maybe here, her sleeve. You can see how much, you can use the neck as negative space and see that it overlaps the halfway mark just a bit. So that's all I'm going to do, drawing, and I will start laying in some of the background. If you've drawn in a real heavy fashion, that was 8 minutes. If you've drawn in a real heavy fashion, you might just take a cloth, a clean cloth, and knock down some of that drawing, especially in the white areas that you don't want to get that charcoal mixed in. The charcoal melts pretty well. It's pretty organic, but you could just knock it down a little like this, just so that you have a kind of a shadow there of where you're going. I am just using a flat, this is a number 3, I think, flat. It's not a bristle. You could use a bristle, but this is a synthetic. I don't know what brand it is. It's just something I grabbed. Use as large a brush as you can so that you're not working yourself to death for this. And you might find one, I may switch to something a little bit bigger. But for oil paint, you definitely want to have something that's aggressive and that you can scoop your paint up like a spoon and lay it on fairly heavily. Now, I'm not using any medium yet, so I'm really going to have to load my brush up in order to paint the way that he's painted. This is a very, in fact, I can already tell from the get-go that I have not mixed enough paint. So you have 2 options here. You can use a little bit of medium to get your paint to flow better. You could even use a palette knife if you want to get this covered. Now I may go ahead and just paint it on thinly and come back and add some brushwork on the top of it just to get it covered. I do paint in an overlapping method, so I'm kind of coming in over her head just a bit. I don't want to do that too much because I see the blue showing through, and again, I don't know if that's tone or if he's underpainted with a heavier blue on there. But you can go ahead and however you feel comfortable with this and get it laid on. It's really dark at the top, the darkest part of the sand. And then I see some lavender in there. And I'm moving down my palette to the lighter yellow, not too quickly. You can see how much brighter that is. So I want to have somewhat of a transition here. And mine's pretty yellow, so if your color is too Easter egg and you feel like it's just too bright for what you're seeing in front of you, you can mix a tiny speck of the complement into it to dull it down. In this case, as I'm going to add some lavender anyway, that will help to dull it down. And everything looks really light and bright next to this dark tone, or on top of this dark tone. So, but the lavender's really pretty in there. And since it is the complement of yellow, it goes so nicely. You know, when you get ready to paint sand and you just mix up a creamy color, you really miss an opportunity to put interesting accents in. So I still have the purple on my brush as I'm coming back into this yellow. I do want to make it a little brighter near her face. I'm kind of side brushing, which I can hear one of my teachers say not to do that, to side brush. But use the whole full width of your brush to get some good mileage in here. Pretty bright right there. Not that bright. That's really bright. Goodness. And that's because it's got so much cad yellow in it. And the white kind of helps tone that down. So have fun with this part and you can come back over and drag some color back over it. I'm going to soften the area around the periphery of her head. I don't want any, although he's got ridges on here. And I suspect that this was done a la prima because it's not taking long. We're able to get this on here pretty fast. So I'm assuming he just was at the beach and did this a la prima. He spent a lot of time at the beach. There are areas with yellow down at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and put those in because I have it on my brush. There is yellow around her, on her dress. We'll put a little purple with it so it's not so bright. Under her arm. There's a lot of purple in this area, right? It's a kind of an orangish purple there, right under her knee. Go ahead and put that in, even though we're not doing the figure right now, but that just reminds me to put that tone in later. You want to have some rhythm and fluidity, really. If you choose to go ahead and do this in one session, and I may go ahead and work on it and just see, I'm dividing it into 2 sessions so that, because that's kind of how I planned, but if you've been painting very long, you know that things definitely are flexible and can be adjusted. And when you get on a roll and you're just really feeling it, it's probably not a good idea to stop. So we will paint something else next week if we get this whole thing painted today. I'm going to go ahead and put some of that yellow in her hair. A bit more under here. A bit more over here. Brighten that up in front of her just a bit. And I think it would be a lot more fun to do this as an alla prima session. There's a warmer area up here. And I think it's good to look for mixing up more purple because I've already used everything I mixed in my purple pile. But I see some notes of purple up here that are really nice. The thing about doing a study of another artist is you really get your magnifying glass out as you're painting and you see color nuances that you might not have noticed if you were sitting out there painting. It really helps you train your eye to see what the other artists saw. And see, I'm already on the get-go here with the top of her head. So I think I'll wait. I think I'll go back to my original plan and go ahead and get this water on. And then reassess from there what I want to do next. So I'm going to start out with the middle tone blue palette. I'm going to start right here with the middle tone on my blue to lay this water in, and then I'm going to. And when I lay that, it's middle tone, but it looks really light on here. I'm going to lose my halfway mark here, which is okay. That's the thing about learning to draw better. And you don't worry when you lose your drawing because you know you can get it back. It wasn't just a fluke that you got it right once and you'll never do it again. I've mixed into my lighter pile and I want to stay. This has a lot of purple in it too. So, whoops. Go ahead and you can see his brush marks here. You can see where he just scumbled this over the top of, it looks like a blue background. The whole thing of painting impressionistically and painting in this painterly method is you have to load your brush up. You use a palette knife, use whatever you need to use to get this paint on here. And when you do water, I see evidence of his strokes going up and down and around her legs, but I try as much as possible to keep my strokes flat. And you can see yellow mixed all in here. So maybe he even just did that. My purple and blue and purple are together up here on my palette, so it's easy for me to dip into both of those. And if the paint is feeling too thick for you and it's not moving around, you can mix a little medium in with it. I'm using my mixture of Gamblin products, Gamvar, Gamsol, and walnut oil. The walnut oil I use is by M. Graham. Doesn't matter, whatever you like to use as a medium. If you like liquid, whatever you like, use that. Remember, this is water, so you might go ahead and wiggle it in is the only way I can think to describe how I get color on here sometimes, is to wiggle it in. But you know, think water, think waves and puddles, and just try to get the feeling of it on there. It gets darker down here with a purplish, almost a violet blue down here on the bottom. And again, that may be the shadow on my screen, because this was a screenshot off of a high resolution video of his work. I do like some of that blue showing that I see around the perimeter of her skirt. So I'm going to try to retain some of that. And I may go back in, actually I may go back in now with a clean brush and pull some of that off so that it will show. You know, when somebody paints something in this fashion, alla prima, all at once, it's hard to do that yourself. I mean, to make it, you're not going to make it look just like his. Because so much of it's just rhythm and quick impressions of what he saw in front of him. Our goal today is to try to see what colors he saw, how his brush stroke was laid on, his brush strokes, I should say. I like this here, and I've scumbled that more. And I could go back in with my brighter blue and drag some of that over the top, because I do have that, the three values mixed in with my blue. This, you can see I've really gobbed it onto my paintbrush, and that's what you want to do here. I'm barely holding the brush with a really light touch. Keeping, again, the water all very horizontally applied. Now it's already started to get kind of sticky on my canvas, or my paper, I should say. I can tell by touching it, the paint's pretty sticky. The titanium white I'm using is a tube without a cap, and so it's not a real creamy white. It's pretty thick and opaque, and I like it that way. I didn't leave the top off on purpose. It broke. But I just haven't worried too much with putting another top on it. The sand could have some up and down strokes. It doesn't have to be all horizontal. I like to vignette my paintings too, so spend a little bit of time thinking about this. Do you want to finish it all the way out to the edge? Do you want to just have a little bit of a vignette of that unfinished feel? Get back from it. Every time I lean forward, I lean back to look at it from a distance. I really like this purple color and this brightness right here, and I've lost that. So I'm going to get a palette knife and I'm going to mix up a little bit more color here so that I can lay it on a little bit thicker. And I'm going to remind you guys in class to mix pretty good piles of paint so that you do not have to stop and do what I'm doing right now, because I'm so thrifty that I do this often. I have to stop, and it breaks your flow. So I want a more lavender color, but I just put so much white in it there that I lost a lot of that beautiful color I see. All right, so I'm going to come back up here and drag some of that back over. Too dark. Let me mix some more white with it. The beauty of Potthast's paintings is the light that he's captured on the beach. And we know he was out there, and I don't know how he got children to pose for him like this. Not sure that he did, but put a little bit more red with that lavender just to warm it up a bit. There we go. I like that a little better. Some of it up here. There's a bit of it here. I see some down here in the water. And, you know, the lavender can kind of be a bit of a mother color, kind of tie everything together. I see a much darker version of it up here in the corner with more red in it. Might just stipple a little bit of that up there. Even more red here. Now I'm using a small palette knife because it's easier for me to control. Use whatever size palette knife you have. But that just helps you, especially once you get all your paint wet. It just helps you to lay wet on top of wet without mushing it in and losing all your beautiful. Let's see, that's too dark. Let me go back to my light pile. And you can do this as many times as you need to. If you want to wipe it all off with a rag and start over, you can. So now, how do we keep from losing all this beautiful texture? But it may feel a little out of control to you. Sand does have texture like this too, so you don't want to totally remove it all. I want to soften a little bit of that down. I'm going to use one of these little mop brushes just to mop it in just a couple places. But I want to retain the feeling that this is sand and this is water. There's really not a hard edge here. There's a bit of a harder edge down here. So let me mix up a little bit more of my lighter blue. And I'm going to use a palette knife to lay that on. I'll put a tiny bit of purple in that. Especially down here around this little wavy thing. Keep your palette knife horizontal. Down here around her feet. And get a little bit more purple going here. And let me show you what I'm doing with my palette knife. When you mix up the color you want, you want to load the edge of it up because you're using the bottom of your palette knife. So if you feel like you're getting too much texture going, it's easy to come back in here and soften some of that down. It's a bit lighter up here than I have it. Not that light. Goodness. Make sure you get the right value when you're doing this. We don't want to have a bunch of waves or ripples up here, but I do like to have it light enough to feature her dress, and her dress is going to be a lot lighter than that. So let's see. I'm pretty sure he used a palette knife here. I don't want to get too light down here. There's a little ripple right around the edge of her feet. It's kind of yellowish. Go ahead and put that in. You can play with that some more as we get to that point. All right, this is really bothering me now, so I may have to take that off. I don't like that on there. And you can even further, I'm going to use a small, medium size sable with the little mineral spirits on it and just lift that off. I can get it completely off there, but I'm not too worried about it. But I wanted you to see that, you know, if you put something on and you don't like it, just take it off. Everything is figure outable and everything is fixable. So don't forget. Don't be intimidated. So on some of this, I want to tone it down just a bit. I'm using this little softening brush. I may use my finger just so it's not so choppy looking. Especially up here around her. The only thing to take away. Coming in over the dress. I don't want, that's just a habit I have. Now you can see where he just painted around her. And that's fine if you want to do that as well. Be careful at this stage that you don't just take out all that nice texture. And get back from it and look at it across the room. Do leave some areas for rest. And even use your finger if you want. I see some pools down here too. I just dip my finger right in my palette. If you're concerned about toxicity issues, then don't do it. But I just leaned into a big pile of ultramarine blue a while ago, and I totally had to go in the bathroom and take almost a bath in hand cleaner to get it off. All right. So I'm not thrilled with how this looks right now, but I'm just reminding myself that this is not the focal point. It's the background and it's the middle stage. So I'm going to stop here and we will do the figure next week. Let me check a couple more things. I want to make sure. Let me see. I should get away from it and do another quick recap. But I want to make sure that I have this covered properly under her chin. It's really yellow. I may adjust this yellow when I get the rest of the paint on next week and decide that it's too yellow. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time looking at at least two different versions of this painting that I found online. This one is much more vibrant, has a little more red in it overall. Sometimes that's the printing process or the camera, so it's hard to tell which one is probably the most accurate. This one is more vivid and warm. You can see that the water, the color that scumbled over the top of the water has more red in it. It's more violet, as are the purple colors in the background against the warm. Her face also is warmer. This one's more yellowish. This one has a little bit more of an orange tone to it. So I'm probably going to go with this one. The color I put on the water, I was working from this one last week. So will have to make some adjustments. And I do not really like how yellow I have my background on this, so I probably will mix up a little more raw sienna and a burnt sienna color for this upper corner, and maybe even just glaze over that some. So I don't want to piddle with it too much. I want to keep this loose all at once feel. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up a tiny bit of skin tone for the arms, legs, and the arm, leg, and face, and this white color, and make sure I have enough color for her hair. This is ultramarine blue, almost pure ultramarine blue with a little bit of white in it. So I will put that in because I like the little touches of that lead the eye around her figure. Okay, I guess I'll start with the white, and I've got a little bit of blue mixed in this for her dress. It's the lightest light, and it looks pure white, but I typically try to put a little bit of either a warm tone or a cool tone in my whites. I want to lean one way or the other, and to me, it looks cool for the most part. There may be a few areas that you see warmth, mixture of the warm and the cool. So that just has a tiny bit of white mixed in with it. We also are going to be using that it's almost like a Naples yellow color that I had mixed up from last week, which simply has a little bit of purple mixed in with this bright yellow to tone it down. There's also a beautiful orange tone on her hands. And again, I need to remember which image I'm going to go from, because if I have them both up here, I'm going to have a tendency to go toward that image, toward that color. Let's see, that's got a little bit of yellow that was left on my palette knife. So let me go ahead and just see if I see that anywhere. See if I see. How about that? Make sure you clean your palette knife in between mixing colors so that you don't end up with muddy looking contaminated colors. All right, the yellow, that's pretty close for what I see. I do want to mix that burnt sienna color because I see that on her knee, her ankles, her hand, her face. So burnt sienna is orange and blue. So we'll start with a pretty strong orange. Pretty good little bit of that. I mean, they're not very big areas. Almost a primary orange. And then we'll just slowly put a speck of blue. See, it doesn't take, blue is so powerful, it doesn't take much. See how quickly you go to a burnt sienna color. And I'm going to tweak it two ways. I'm going to make it a little bit cooler on that side. And that's what I see in her hair, down around her ankles. I'm going to make it a little warmer on this side with less yellow in it. Put a little bit more yellow in it. Get back to the orange and a speck of blue. No white. I don't want to lighten it at all, so I want to be careful over here in this pile that I don't get into my white. Make a little bit bigger pile here so I have enough to work with. And see what happens when you just mix the red and blue, you get purple. So need some yellow in it. So much easier when you just have these three colors. You can ask yourself, does it need to be warmer? Does it need to be cooler? Does it need to be darker? Put a little bit more yellow in with this. Because there's a real dark on her face, around her eyes, and in her hair. So that's giving me a pretty good range there, and I can brush mix some if I need to. Now, for skin tones, let's go with just our yellow and red. Mix those over here. That's what I always start with. I ask myself, is she yellowish? Is she red, pinkish, or is she orangish? And the image I'm looking at is quite orange. Like that's almost what I see in her cheeks in the brightest spot. Very orange. I see that in the side of her face a bit. Let me put a little bit more red with it. Lean it towards the pink side a bit more. And when you first mix skin tone, I say this every time, but when you first mix up your little pile of what you think will be skin tone, I could mix more yellow if it feels yellowish, more red if it feels pinkish, and more red and yellow to make it more orange. It's really more orange than pink. If it feels too bright, what I call Easter egg tones, you can just put a small speck of the complement. So in this one, I'd put a speck of blue, just a speck, to tone it down just a little. Hard to get a speck, and then you get too much if you're not careful. There we go. Oops. All right, so that's giving me more of a shadowy color. I don't want to lose all this pretty clean color because I see that in her cheeks and along her arm as well. Let's mix a little bit more of our orangey color back up. And you can see orange, pink, and there's your orange with white. So I know immediately it needs a bit more red, so it's not so orange. Ooh, boy, not that much red. I think as it goes down on her leg, it gets a little warmer. So we can take a little bit of this yellow and mix that with white. Just a speck of the orange in it. As I need to, I will tweak that and put some shadow color in it. It's mostly yellows that you see in the shadow planes of her fingers, under her sleeve. It's bright orange under her knee here. And then the ultramarine blue color, which I see a lot behind her. I'll leave that up here away from my other colors. I think that's just pure ultramarine blue that I see. I'm going to put a little bit of white in with it to give myself two values of it. Ooh, didn't take much to lighten that. Okay, let's start painting. I am using the same brushes basically that I've been using all along. This is a number 2 Rosemary Filbert in the ivory. And that's a softer sable version, number 2. Actually, it's a 4 by this brand. And I have a larger one for the dress. May use some palette knife, just a flat brush. And I've got a few detail brushes and softening brushes. I want something fairly aggressive to lay this first layer in. And I'm going to start with the darks. I do have swish my brushes in mineral spirits because I use the orange hand cleaner on my brushes, and I don't want to, I can see that kind of cloudiness after I rinse them, so I can tell there's a little bit of that hand cleaner mixed in or left in the brush. There's a lot of blue around the periphery of this. Again, maybe he toned his canvas with the blue, but I'm going to go ahead and put a few notes of that bright blue underneath her hair in a couple of spots. You can see it showing through here. See it on her shoulder. I like to start with my darkest darks first. And because I have not yet introduced any white onto the canvas. So it's just a good habit, especially if you're working in oils, to get yourself in, to think about darkest darks first so you don't muddy your colors. Putting these strokes last week really didn't help me any. It's just a habit when I'm working on a piece. Wherever I see that color, I go ahead and make a note of it. Color notes is really what they are. And this this way of painting, my paint's very stiff, so it's pretty much of a challenge to get this paint on here and to not get bogged down with it because it feels like toothpaste. I do have this is still wet. You can see where I laid some wax paper. It kind of smushed it. It's been damp around here and cool, so the paint's not drying very fast. All right, that's about all. Maybe a little bit down here. A little bit in here, maybe. All right, I'm going to clean my brush up, and I'm going to go to my next darks, which, starting from the head, working my way down, are this burnt sienna color that I mixed up with orange and blue. And I'm getting some reflections. Whenever you use dark colors like this, you can expect to see reflections. And I'm really noting the angle of her face. So it's this way. If I can keep my brush there, that helps me gauge it more accurately. It doesn't look dark enough. It doesn't look like it's as dark as his. I'm trying to use a big brush, which means it's going to be kind of obnoxious for a bit until I come back in and carve some of that down. See it right here in her ponytail, the dark, and here underneath her ear, underneath her neck. And it's not really that much. I'll come back in there and put it back in again. I've got kind of a weird green color there where I wiped that off earlier. I'm going to go back to my orange now, which is the darkest dark on her leg here. A little bit brighter than it was when I registered it last week. That's about right. It is brighter in this version of the painting. A little bit of that in the water, a little bit in her hands. A little bit in her chin and her neck, and then the back of her neck. Moving on to the next value. Ooh, and that's really bright. It wraps around the bottom of her chin here. If it feels too orange to you, I've got a yellow mixture here. And the back of her leg here. These are very broken, crude brush marks. So having the right size brush, because see, that's just a little smaller than the width of her arm. Gosh, you can see how these are just little brush strokes. No real detail, just a fast recording of what Potthast saw. He didn't stress over it. He quickly recorded what he saw. Gosh, we want to get in here already and start getting a fine detail brush and carving out these features, but resist the urge. Try to learn that quick gestural work. Now I'm going to move to the dress, and I'm going to go ahead and pick up some of this middle tone blue that I mixed up, because we're going to be able to really see values now against the background. Think about modeling around these shoulders as you lay these strokes in. Try to state it as simply as you can, with as few strokes really as possible. I think that would be smart. I think it's good. I've known painters that do studies with limited brush strokes, and that makes you careful and really weigh your brushwork before you put it on the canvas, instead of just going crazy and putting strokes everywhere. I'm going to stay with this lighter version. I think watching Marcy's work, she was in a Max Ginsburg workshop with me several years ago, and after she came out of that, I just saw, not that I knew her work before, but I started paying more attention to her work, and I think Max really made an impact on her. She would have to answer that herself, but we watched him work, and he would make just such deliberate brushwork. He didn't waste any strokes whatsoever. He made them all count. And he had, of course he's been painting forever, but he made very few corrections. I mean, and we're always correcting, but still, if you can really study your subject and look at the rhythms and what's going on, and try to state it as simply as possible, I think it'll be a great lesson for you. And even if this doesn't turn out to be something that you just want to show everybody and you're so excited about, I think just doing this will make a big difference for you in how you look at your next painting and what things you choose to focus on and what things you, let's see, this square brushes, I'd rather have a filbert for these strokes. So I'm bordering on doing too much here. And this is dry. So I'm gonna, when I move from the white to the warm yellow, I want to make sure I have a different brush so that I'm not mixing my colors up and making green. So here again, when you go from color to color, or when you let your colors dry, I should say, you have to re-wet them to get them to blend, because that's not going to do anything right there. It's just going to sit there. So I'm going to get these wet again, this yellow. This yellow under her arm. This yellow around her belt. And the yellow in her hair. But I want to put some other things there before I do that yellow in her hair. All right, so again, I'm switching back and forth. I've got one for yellow, one for the cool white of her dress. And I'm going to go ahead and, even though this is a large brush, I'm going to try to pop in some of this bow. And you can really tell that he mashed the brush there. Looking at the brush, mashed it and twisted it. It makes an interesting, brush stroke and texture there. And I'm looking at the negative space between her chin and her shoulder here. So I know I've got to come up a little higher. I picked up a little bit of pure white just to kind of lay on top a couple of spots. And you'll have to turn your brush a different way. When you hold it with the pencil grip, you you have really strong pressure against the canvas. When you flip it around and hold it so that you can see your rings, then you can drag the paint over the top of the surface, and it will hold that color and not mush into your paint. And that's what I'm looking for right here. I don't want to mush it. And this is a synthetic brush. It's not a hog hair. The hog hair is so aggressive. It will be like a broom and it'll smush all your paint in. So I'm going to drag some pure white almost over the top of that. She's a little wider through here. I don't think I have her wide enough through here. So let me measure. Let me stop for just a second to measure that. So the whole width of her waist on this diagonal is the same as the length of her arm. So that's pretty close. So the width of her through the mid shoulder here is the same as from the very top part of her head to her chin. So mid shoulder needs to be wider. This comes out right through the bottom of her mouth, so I need to pull it out here on the front side. Bring that up just a bit. There, that looks a little better. And just think about, again, we have the opportunity of really looking at his brushwork and trying to interpret that, and try to hold your brush with varying degrees of pressure. Hold it different ways, backwards, this way, to where you're just kind of dragging the paint over the top. This is a little more circular like that. You've got that really pretty flow going where she's holding her dress up. Okay, I mixed up some more of this lavender color. Remember, it leans heavier on the red side. It's just ultramarine blue and cad red with some white mixed in it. And I'm going to drag that over. I'm going to grab a little, I've got two values of that. So I'm going to drag it over a couple places. It gets bluer in this area. And more purplish in another area here. Let's see if I can mix up another version of it. Down here, it's definitely bluer. The blue kind of dulls it though. So I'm trying to get that same, maybe that's where he used that cobalt violet, so it's hard to get that pretty color in here. Let's see. Kind of got a fruity color of water going here, but that's okay. Again, you're just learning. You're trying to see how he did it, how he handled everything. And you want to get the feel for this puddle down there on the bottom as well. So I have kept my brushes separate. I have one for the dress. I have one for the yellow tones. I have one for skin tones. And I've got a new one out that I'm going to use for her hair. And some of these dark areas around her hair. I switched it off again, make sure my brush is clean, and dabbing it off with a paper towel. And when you do hair, you want to try to get at least 3 values. So I've put this darkest dark down, which is a dark burnt sienna. I'm going to move to the next color, that middle tone color, which is a dark raw sienna. And I want to lay it in because I want to think about light. The way the light hits the head is like a halo, as if she had a halo around her head or a garland of flowers. And I want to put that next light color right next to that on both sides. Wrap it around the head this way. A little bit of that here, that next to the lighter color. And then I'm going to go lighter still. I might need to mix a little more yellow with that. That's my 3 values here. Let me show you. These 3 values, from a dark burnt sienna to the raw sienna to almost a yellow ochre. Those are the colors I'm using. Okay. Now I'm going to scoop up that lighter yellow, and I want to lay that in kind of heavy. And I want to wrap it around the head this way, the way a halo would wrap. There's also another stroke going down the back of her head like that. This is a pretty small brush. Her head seems a little large to me, but I may have to carve it back down, but there's a little bit of that middle tone right there. So dark, middle tone, light, middle tone, dark. And that creates more of a sense of the head wrapping. Now, it's only really, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strokes. So now I want to get another brush. I'm gonna try this long Egbert or long filbert because it doesn't have such a hard pressure on it. And I want to try to chisel this hair around the head. We've wrapped it this way. Now I want to wrap it this way. And I want a clean brush. I don't really have enough paint on the head to do this, but maybe I can make it work. Just chisel these colors together a bit. That could still go on darker. This is a real pretty little bright color right here on the back of her neck that I don't quite have. It's a reddish burnt sienna color. Tiny bit of that right there. And a little bit of it here. And I can go back over here to my bright orange under her chin. Right here on her cheek. Beside her eye. Don't quite have enough paint up on the top. Let me go back down here while I have the orange on my brush. And I'm using this long filbert again. It has a nice bounce to it. Margaret Dyer was so good about teaching us about warmth in the hands. And she had us hold our fingers up to the light and have a light shine through them. I don't know if you can see it here on the camera, but you see that hot color on the tips of my fingers? And that just brings your figures to life when you add that in. You only see it when you have a light on. Let me show you the difference. So you can either paint the fingers this brownish color, or you can bring them to life with the play of light on your subjects. The closer you get to the light, the more translucent. Look at the skin. Look at the oranges. You see that yellow area, and then in between the shadow. Actually, you see 4 values on my finger here. Whoops. You see this value, shadow, glow, and yellow light. And that gives that finger dimension. So think about that when you're working on hands. You want to create a alive, luminous feeling and the quality of light. That's what people love about these paintings that he made. He's outside and he's trying to capture quickly the feeling of light as it hits a transparent skin. A lot of yellows and oranges there's no fingers, there's just the pad of the hand. So again, this is a challenge to paint this way, to just block it in and resist any urge to get in there and do details. So what do I want to do now? It's really piecemeal, it's really disconnected. So I'm going to clean my brush. I want to come in here and clean up my background color up here, this yellow color a little bit. So I'm going to remix. I want you to see what I'm going to do as I remix those colors to get rid of that bright yellow and make it more of a sand color like I see. So I had purple on my palette knife and I should have just left that on there. Let me grab a little of this purple. And let me tone this yellow down and see if that's closer to what I see up there. And I think it is. I might even put a little more purple in it. That is always a good place to start when you're trying to figure out what a color needs. If it's reading too yellow, now hold it up to the painting to see like this and close one eye and look, and that's exactly what I see. So let me drag that across a little bit, especially in these brighter areas where it's so yellow. Over here. Over here. And then I'm going to go into my burnt sienna color, which remember is just orange with blue mixed in it. All right, that's what I see up at the top is this color. And then more of this color on the background. All right, so I added a few notes here, and I want to go back in here and grab some of this burnt sienna color and put that up at the top. And you know, you don't have to use a palette knife. It's just one way to deposit some color back in after you've misjudged. I'm going to get a clean brush for this burnt sienna. The best way to keep from muddying your colors up is to use more brushes. Lots of people paint beautiful paintings with just one brush, but that can also create a lot of muddy color. Some of this is wet, so it's not covering so well. I got a lot of glare today. This is really bright up here. That doesn't belong there above her head. So let me just wipe that off. I got a little carried away. It's really distracting. I don't want anything distracting around her head. You want those to be clean, smooth colors. In fact, palette knife's not even really necessary, so keep these colors clean. And this is, I've gone back to a Simmons or Robert Simmons flat hog hair, which is, you see how it's sweeping like a broom and making really scratchy marks. I don't love that. But it's aggressive. It covers it for you. I'm going to have to take a brush and come back and knock some of those reflections off. All right. And then I want to work some of this in. I want to redefine around her face a little bit, because I think if you study any painters, you'll see Sargent as well, that they come back in and carve out the features and have to make corrections. One of my friends studied with, a couple of my friends studied with Avanus Barbarian, and the whole workshop, they only could do up and down strokes like this. And so I'm not sure exactly what the purpose of that was, but I know they came back and could see a difference in their work. Sometimes in the Impressionist world, it makes you slow down and look and just keep everything, especially, most things are vertical, figures, landscape, trees. The only things that's vertical, that's horizontal usually, is water and pathways. So sometimes it's helpful to go back in with the up and down strokes, get those in. Anywhere else I see yellow. A lot of it down here, front of her legs. And I'm going to have to carve a little bit more of a nose out there for her. I don't have enough nose. Actually, my finger's working pretty well for this because the paint's pretty sticky. So you have to assess how the quality of your paint as you're working. Is it stiff? Is it juicy from medium or fresh paint? Like some of the colors from Rembrandt are so oily that they come out really, really oily out of the tube. So if you've got that going on and you've covered your canvas a lot, you're going to have a different quality to your paints. Mine is so stiff that it's like sticky. And my finger works really well to just lay these strokes down so they're not standing out so much. There, that's looking better. And remember that a real strong horizontal stroke will catch light. So we can go back at the end with a mop or a Mongoose, something really soft that's dry, and just knock the strokes from left to right at a diagonal. And that'll take some of those reflections out as it dries. But if it's a stroke sitting like this, it's going to catch light. And even a horizontal stroke, a vertical stroke or diagonal stroke will catch light sometimes too. So just check out your brushwork before it dries and see if there's anything that's real distracting. This yellow, again, is too yellow. Go back to my lavender mixture and fix this right here. And her neck is not wide enough now, so I need to fix that. There's a lot of things to tweak here. I'm going to work on it a little bit and come back so you don't have to watch my every stroke. I do want to work this in together, so I have to decide what kind of brush I want to use for that. And I'm going to load a little bit of a cool tone in it because I see cool tones coming. It's probably underneath, but I'm using a softer brush here. And I want to be careful because this mixing the yellow and blue is going to turn this totally green here. And that's not my goal. So I'm going to keep wiping my brush. If I feel like I'm starting to contaminate it, I'm wiping it, getting a little bit more of this light blue coming in here and softening that together. I want to drag some color over the top of that too, because you see some, there we go. Notice I'm holding it different so you can see my rings again. Same here, this is just light blue here. This is a softer brush, so it's not scraping the paint off as much. And I've gone back into my white with just a little blue in it, a little very light blue, to come back in here and put some of these brush strokes in here. Her sleeve could be a little wider here. Just kind of marry these pieces together so they're not standing out separately. And I think there's a real trick to knowing how much of that to do. Don't get rid of all your pretty brushwork, but you don't want it so busy that we can't tell what's going on. All right, we don't have strong blue right here separating these two pieces. And you see the fullness of her skirt right here as it's dropping out of her hand, and that's really pretty. That's a nice thick stroke. And you see, I am just barely holding that brush and letting it fall. Don't use too small of a brush here either, because if you have too many strokes, you're going to break some of this beautiful rhythm that he's got going here. And it is easier to see his brushwork here. That makes it easier for us. Look how much space there is here behind her arm. So I can afford to bump that out a bit. Yep. And it'd be an interesting exercise to do a painting like this and to try to state it as simply as possible without a lot of, as Helen would say, hoop-de-doo. Just get it on there. All right, I think I want to leave the skirt alone now, and I want to get away from it a bit. I want to correct, I think there could be a little bit more light on the back of her leg. So I'm going to mix a little bit more white with my peachy color down here, just to put one more value, especially on the back of her ankle right here. Yeah. Maybe a bit here. And then on her arm, the top of her arm here. All the way down. And on her head, there's some light. Here. 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 All right, I'll mix some more dark. And this is the area that I struggle with a little bit because I like to reach for my raw umber. And what I did was I mixed red and blue, or I mixed orange with some blue in it. More blue, more orange, more red. And so you see that I've got a very bluish dark, cool dark. Warms up here in the middle, that's more brown. Leans a little greenish in some areas. And then more red over here. But there's a different temperature to all three piles. So that's what I'm looking for. I want to go back and restate the darks on the top of her head, across the front of her face. And I'm going to get a smaller brush to do this, a clean brush. And maybe a tiny bit of medium because I want to kind of draw with those darks and make them register. So I have a completely clean brush. I'm using a Rosemary Mongoose number 2, which is fairly soft, but look how long it is. I put a little medium on it, and I'm using that darker, cooler tone first for right along the top of her head. And that's registering. It's getting dark enough. So I lost that once I started painting back into it, and I have so much glare from the window coming in on my painting that I can't see well. But I want those really good rich darks. A little bit of medium just makes them go on in a more fluid way. I don't want her head to get too big. Just remember, heads have a way of growing. And remember that the eyes were a little lower than halfway. Nose this way. And then it gets less dark as it moves down. Where else do I see darks? Here. And as I touch the painting and get paint on it, it contaminates those darks. So I have to go back in, wipe the brush, come back in, restate them with the pure dark. I think I have plenty there. A bit here. And this rosemary works perfect for right here. I'm going back to some of the warm tones right here on her neck. I've got a little bit of orange, lighter orange to lay in right here. And I have to keep putting this back in, but I'm going to come back and try it one more time. This pretty color on her cheek. May have too much medium in there. It's kind of diluting it, taking some of that beautiful, brilliant color out. I want to watch any kind of a downward pull on the mouth, on the corners of the mouth, because that always gives a person a scowl. You can just turn the corners of the mouth up and make a huge difference on an expression. And I'll have to come back in here and put that pretty light back in. Kind of chewed it all up and lost it. Let me see what else down here while I have this nice, the bounce on these long Mongoose. If I had any brush that I couldn't do without, it's these Mongoose brushes, especially working wet and wet. They're so beautiful. They work so well. And I love this piece of light on the top of her arm here. And the back of her leg. And there's a pretty little cool tone right here on her head. I'm sure that was accidental, but I like it. Now's when I have to be on my guard, because I'll piddle it all away. All this brushwork if I'm not careful. I want to lay a little bit more light on her hair there to give it some more dimension. So I'm going to push into my yellow so that it's kind of gobbed up on the brush. I don't know if you can see that. And I want to lay it in, again, wrapping it around her head like a halo. This way, a little bit here. It's nice if you can make these strokes look like they were just one time and effortless, but I promise you, Sargent, so many of these other guys would stress over a stroke. They'd take it off and put it on, take it off and put it on to make it look effortless. These are kind of bright. They should be this bright, but why not? All right, now that that's so bright and there's a piece of cool kind of in the middle there too. Now I'm going to clean that brush off. I'm going to try to use the Mongoose to do it with. And I want to kind of comb this back in so it's not standing out. Oops. Whoops, sorry. Wrap it around the head. Again, pretending like you're combing the hair or wrapping it. And some painters say not to do that, not to model, but it's the only way I know to make it feel like it's wrapping. You have to think about the roundness and the spherical shape of the head. All right. Do I want to soften anything else out? Let's see. I like the squared off stroke on the front of her forehead. So I want to go back in there and try to get that again. It's here, and it comes straight down like that. And over, and it gets warmer as it goes in. Don't have much of a lip on her. Whoops. She does have a lip coming up here. Almost an outline of her face. It's a cool tone under her chin. Up this way. And one little stroke can make her look mean too, so it's challenging to get this just right. If you mess it up, come back in here with your background color and kind of carve it back out again. Make sure these darks are not standing out like a sore thumb too much. Grab a little bit of warmth for this last stroke down here. A little bit of this pretty peachy color around the bottom of her chin. Once the paint's wet, sometimes you have to put a little extra color on to get it to register. There's a tiny bit, and I know it's on accident, but there's a tiny bit of a light blue. I don't know if it's on accident, but it's nice around between her nose and her mouth. Right here. And that kind of caved her in a bit. All right, I think I'm going to stop. I can keep working on this and tweaking it, but I want to get that quick alla prima feel. I don't want to overwork it. I want to make sure her jawline and everything is similar. There's a nice rhythm right here. And I think another thing to learn in this painting is rhythms. Instead of being so precise and stiff that you miss those pretty rhythms that you see in the clothing and in her skirt, how this is wrapping around. While I have a Mongoose, I think I'll just finish out with a couple more bold strokes of light color because that's what he's got going on here. There's probably more. Whoops. I need a bigger Mongoose, but you can see how that lays the paint on real heavy with a real light pressure. And more than likely about a 4 in a mongoose would work great. So here is a number 4 rosemary mongoose, and that'll make a nice bold stroke instead of these little tiny piddly strokes that I'm having to work to death on. Over her shoulder, there's more fluidity here. Use as large a brush as you can get away with. Just because I used a smaller one doesn't mean you need to. I just forget. There's so many things to think about as you're painting, but your strokes will be more convincing if they're clean and not too overworked. Now, there's a time for pointillism. There's a time to have a lot of texture in your brush, in your strokes. So you just have to decide. This drops from her waist here. Yeah. May have that a little bit too textural, but I'm going to leave it. And there's a little more going on down here around this puddle of her legs. There's some darks and some lights swirling around her. I'm going to get a little bit of medium. Put a few darks in here. Water is very fluid, so if you don't get any fluid strokes in there, sometimes you miss out on the swirls. You see her knee comes out a little bit more than I have it. And her legs need to be wide enough to hold her up. If they're too small, they're too skinny, it'll look like she's going to tip over. So, a few little small things you can check. I still don't have this beautiful peachy color on her cheek. It's my favorite color in the world to paint. I have a little left on my brush here. And you can think about the values on the arm. You know, there could be 2 or 3. See a little bit of her thumb there. Back to my white. Oops, got some yellow in it. So be careful about contaminating these beautiful cool tones. Okay, I'm going to call it quits for now. We'll go back and look at it. Okay, I took a photo and pulled it up alongside Potthast piece, and I'm looking at it in color. And I am also going to look at it in black and white to check my values in my drawing. And you can see it probably looks a little better in black and white. I can see, I usually ask myself what's the first thing that jumps out. And I think she feels a little narrow through here. Everything else feels okay. This is a little bright right on the back of her leg. This is a little wide right here. I could adjust the value on that. So there's just some small things. I want to ask myself at this point if I want to soften some areas where they are melty. And that's something I almost always do as I go back and check my hard edges. Now this is pretty hard because it's such an impressionistic, thickly applied paint. So you can see all the colors and black and white here. And I just took a screenshot of them, opened them both in preview, and got them close to the same size so that I could look at them together. There's a little bit more of a rhythm right here with the bottom of her dress that I could get that to flow a little better. I'm okay with it overall. There's some areas like right here that are sort of melty. Where else? Here, there's no division on the back of the sleeve, so I may soften that a bit. There's a little bump here on her shoulder, so she's still wider through here. And this, you know, some work right in here. I've got her jaw kind of sagging right there, so I could just soften that out. It's just little tiny touches. I still like seeing these blue notes through the back, so I may go back and try to put those in and mush up the water a little bit. So these are good things. Let me go check on value and see what I want to change on the values. This area here is about the right value. It's just really big, so I could cut that down a little, darken that just a little. This feels okay. All the values feel pretty good. I've got it a little bit dark down here in the water. These values are pretty good. There's a little bit of lighter value here on the back of the neck. And these are small things. I have the value in the hair a little bit too light. So I could tone that down a little. Just do a little bit of work. So I like to work at this stage with the black and white up because I already have the color here. I don't really need any color notes so much. I can go ahead and pull up this one so that I can see it and have all three up. There's a lot of glare on my screen right now, but I'll have all three of these up as I'm working. But looking at mine side by side does help. So I'm going to do that real quick. I do like also this lost edge right here. And it's if you look at the color version, it is, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a cool tone right there. It's a lavender tone right there on in her hair. I still really like this beautiful, vibrant color on her cheek that I don't really have on the back of her neck, and it's lighter than I have it. Let's see if I can get that to register a little better. And I want to kind of mush this a little so she doesn't have that feeling of a saggy jawline there. It's a little cleaner right there. And I really like the lavender tone on the edge of her hair here. See if I can get that in. I like that really nice royal blue color. That's sort of silhouetting her head. Again, I think it is his tone showing through. I really like it though. A little piece of it here. Her features, still a bit harsh right here. And I wanted to widen her upper torso a little. Soften that out. These are really small corrections. I'm working on the value change here. So I'm going to have to go in with some of that blue to darken it a little. And my brush has a lot of white on it, so key is clean off white. Your white really mucks things up if you're trying to get darks back in there and you're working wet into wet. It just won't register for you. Here we go. There we go. And a little bit darker here. Looking at those, almost melts in with the arm here. There's a bit of flesh that kind of melts in with the front there. Not so much of a hard line on the edge of her arm. And also down here, this isn't such a hard line on the back of her leg. Remember that a cylinder, usually the light hits right along the 1/3 line and not right on the edge, because if the light's right on the edge, unless it's backlit, it sort of flattens the image out, makes it look like a coloring book. There's a little bit of purple down here that's nice. And we'll soften some of these darks out in these swirls. And there's some thick paint around the edge that's like a little bit of foam. So just kind of gob it on. Not too much. I'm way away from the canvas, so my hand's kind of shaky. There's some up here. Okay, what else? Let's see. I wanted to adjust this value a little, and that's a cool tone, so I'm going to go back in with some pretty dark blue and just rock a little bit of that blue back in here to darken it a bit. Checking my values here. This is more of a straight down line. And then there's kind of a lost edge here into the water. That's a nice area to make it just melt. Also, I'm going to go back to my big brush and grab a little bit of pure white, and I'm going to work on this nice rhythm right here. And I want to kind of practice it before I hit it. A lot of times that helps if you kind of get your, I guess like a golfer would practice his stroke before he hits it. We don't give ourselves enough practice time and rhythmic emphasis. This is pretty light right here. And this is pretty flat right here, which creates the top of her shoulder. There's a little bit of a twist here. Might not be that light. A little bit of a lavender mush right here as well. I haven't got it in there yet. Now that I know that value's too light, so I'm going to go back in and tap it out. And I'm going to soften this down a bit. Just because I want to learn from his brushwork. I can't make every stroke like his, but I can learn from the way he lays in his brushwork. I'd have pretty much lost that. That's good. I'll go back with my light here because that's pretty light along this shoulder here. And there's a piece of light right here. And here. Whoops. See, if you have a very hard brush, it's going to lift the color off. Seems like there was one other area I wanted to work on. Oh, the hair is a little bit too light. So I am going to get a soft brush. Oops. I'm going to get this soft mop, and I'm going to go in just to see if I need to mop anything out. This is a little too harsh. It's drawing the eye up here. Looks like a butterfly. And the hair, too light. Kind of breaks the form if it's too light. Make sure I don't have too much of an emphasis on this cheek. Anywhere else that it's melting. Sort of melts right here. And let's see. Finger works good, especially when the paint starts to dry a little bit, so that it's not so usually when I put strokes in on a leg or arm this way, I go back and model them, but he didn't do that. So you just see the strokes. But that does help sort of create that feeling of a cylinder type feeling. And this goes kind of down into a point here. Just kind of feel the bunch up, the bunchy feeling of her dress. Okay, I better stop. Of course, I can't put my brush down. I did go back in and darken around this bow right here. That helped to really anchor her head. This little piece here is pretty strong. And I think she's okay down here at her feet, but I want to make sure that I lost this little line when I was blending, so I want to put that back in. I like that color, that orangey color down there around her feet. That sort of anchors her a little bit as well. And then there's a little bit of a blue tone right along the edge of her ankle right here, or of her leg. Let's see if I can get it in. Ooh, it's too dark, but that's okay. Let me go back. Kevin Balfus talked about, I think his teacher was Carolyn Anderson, and he talked about little fireflies or anchor points that you have, and I see that here and here, here, there. They just kind of lead the eye around, and I think that's important. I go back sometimes and redraw and kind of emphasize those spots. Pretty dark under her leg, but I think looking at my value, it's about right. It could be a tiny bit darker under there. I don't want to piddle with it too much. And there's a little bit, oh no, I thought that was reflection under there. That's not. But there could be a little reflection under here. Make that water go back behind the leg, and then you have to come back over the leg and push it back in front. Ah, look at me. I'm messing it up. Easy to do. And easy to fix it. Again, there's some really hot, bright color right here. That makes it really glowy and pretty. Okay, so I'll try to film these as standalone, and even though I've already shown this in the last study we did, I'm going to talk about signatures. Remember, you always want to sign, if you're doing a study, you want to sign the artist's name with yours underneath it. After a Potthast or a study of, or just their name and yours underneath it. I realized that I need a new signature brush. This is about the size that I like, but it's a little cheapo. I have this one, which is a little bit too fat. I don't particularly like the thickness of it. Let's see, this one is a little more the size, and I've loaded it up with paint, but it's about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to show you, I like to lay my paintings flat when I sign them, usually just wherever there's less interference. And I'm going to put his name first. He prints it, P O T T. And I try to redip pretty often. Potthast. And this is a terrible brush. Yes, I'm trying to sign it a little bit like him, but I shouldn't. I should do my own version. And then he uses a T all the way across. Potthast study. If you emphasize the downstroke and try to do all your strokes going down, it's a little easier. It's not a bad idea to take a calligraphy course if you have a lot of trouble. You can get online and do some calligraphy. You can practice your calligraphy. And I get kind of out of whack here. And then I'm going to put, it's not too good, but it's all right, put my initials underneath. C. Keep dipping. Almost dip after every letter. C, H, P. Now, if you mess it up in a big way, you can always clean your brush. Sometimes I get a little flat brush and come back in, a little flat sable, something kind of soft, and I'll come back in and clean up any letters that have gotten too chubby. That H. I keep putting mineral spirits and kind of cleaning it off. You don't want it to drip, so make sure you keep a paper towel handy. And worst case scenario, it's better if you wait till your painting's dry to sign it, because then you can just come back in and wipe it off if you don't like it. You get as many tries as you want. It's pretty easy to go back in and clean up your letters. I got the P too chubby on the bottom. Go right along the edge of it, skinny it back up. Even though the paint's wet underneath it. You can also take the color of the paint and go right along the edge and clean that up as well. But this is a study. I'm not really worried about it. It's not going to be hanging on the wall anywhere. This is in my sketchbook. So I really just want recorded who it is. And on the facing page that I did the rough draft on, I'm going to make some notes as to what I learned. While I have it, I'm going to go ahead and make a little color chart to show the colors that I used while I have them on my palette. And there's my leftover palette with the colors that I use, so it's real easy for me to make that color chart. Okay, and cleaning my brushes. I just try to cover this each time because I think it's helpful. I'll start with the largest brushes first, and I wipe off as much as I can with a rag and swish them in the mineral spirits or solvent, whatever solvent you're using. And then I use this hand cleaner, orange hand cleaner. And you can see as you smush that hand cleaner in, if there's any color left in the ferrule or in the very belly of the brush, it will come out. And so I just kind of keep pushing that around in my palm until I get as much of the paint out as I can, wipe it on the rag. And then I'll leave that, leave that hand cleaner it has lanolin in it, and it just kind of moisturizes my brushes and keeps them clean. So again, a reminder that I always swish my brushes in mineral spirits before I paint, because I leave this lanolin based product, which is what mechanics use. But see how nice it keeps the brushes really oiled up. Brushes are natural hairs. The ones that I use are mostly natural, some synthetic, but it really moisturizes the brushes. And again, if you have any color left at all, especially up in the ferrule, it just squeezes that out. And it doesn't take, once you get going, you can do this really fast and get them all cleaned. Sometimes if you used a really strong color, you may have a lot of paint left in that belly. And so I just clean until I can get it as clean as possible. The only ones I do not put the hand cleaner on are my mop brushes, or these little watercolor brushes, because I don't want those oily. And they're cheapo brushes. And then I use just whatever's left on my hands to get the excess paint off my hands and rinse it off. And I'm good to go. It's also great, the orange cleaner is great if you get any paint on your clothes. You can just rub a little spoonful onto your clothing and throw it in the wash, and it comes right out. Also, as I clean up, I'm so thrifty that I hate to waste paint. So usually I will scoop up the leftover warm colors, and a little razor blade scraper like this really does a better job than the palette knife. But you see, you can scrape all these into one pile, and I can take this one pile and put it right here. And there's not really enough to save, but if you have enough, you can do that. Put it all to the edge of your painting, edge of your palette, I'm sorry. So I would take all the cool colors, the blues, and the warm colors, and put those in one pile. And then all of my, make sure you clean your palette knife off before you do this. And then I've got a nice little deep pile. I do have some other paintings to work on. Sometimes I can use the rest of this. I think I'll leave the purple and the blue separate. If I just want to use the leftover paint to gesso another canvas, I usually make a cool and a warm pile. Whoops, that had a lot of red in it. But still, that might be a color I can use. And then the darks here. It's a good habit to clean your palette off after each session, whether you're going to paint again. Most of the time I think I'm going to paint the very next day, or I'm going to paint again in a few hours, and I don't. And it's always a detriment to me to come in to a really dirty palette. It makes me, I don't want to clean up. So if I can take about 2 minutes and do this each time, and this razor blade works great. I'm going to put this in my flesh tone pile. I don't know what I did with that, but let's put it right here. Make myself a little fleshy pile. And then if I don't like it, if I don't ever use it later on, I can come back in and just clean it all off with the razor blade. It's easy to do that. But I do have some harmonious color here, or if I decide to go back and put a few more little touches onto that painting, I have all the colors already here. And what's left over with the white is predominantly cool, so I'm going to put it in this cool pile right here. And there I have a clean palette to start with next time. Again, this razor blade works great on the glass shadow box. And then sometimes I'll just get a paper towel and wipe the rest of it off, and I am good to go. One of my teachers, Barbara Applegate, used to just transfer hers to a piece of palette paper. Each day at the end of her session, she would put all of her colors around the perimeter of her palette and be ready with clean colors to start the next time. Now these are getting kind of nasty, so at some point I take them off. But I keep the colors next to the cups of clove oil, and that keeps them nice and wet for weeks and weeks, and sometimes even months. I also put all of my paper towels, I've thrown them in the trash, but I usually put them all in a coffee can or a metal can with the top on it until I can dispose of them properly, because anything with mineral spirits on it is combustible, so you want to be careful with that.